There is nothing wrong with your radio.
Do not attempt to adjust the volume.
We are controlling the broadcast.
For the next hour we will control all that you hear.
You are about to experience the knowledge and insights of the media mothership.
Right, you're listening to Media Mothership here on Edge Radio 99.3 FM. Thanks for Ava from Clarkett's great show beforehand. Thanks for getting the show all pumped up. And Media Mothership, in its own way, will be clarking it with a interesting focus on Clark Kent and Superman, with Superman Day being around the corner. We're going to unpack some interesting facts and local relevancies on Superman, as well as we always do on Media Mothership, look at how media shapes our understanding of the world around us. I'm your host, as always, Dr. Craig, and we're broadcasting out of Nipaluna, Hobart, Tasmania, Edge Radio's wonderful studios. You can listen to us live on the FM stream, coming at the car stereos and other FM local footprints, as well as listen to us streaming live on YouTube and Twitch. You can find us just by searching Media Mothership on YouTube Live or on Twitch. We're also on the Dab, and this show, as always, gets podcasted later, so you can listen back on demand, either on the Edge Radio website, edgeradio.org.au, or just hunt us down via your podcast provider of choice. All right, so we're going to dive in on today's show looking at moments where fictional characters get holidays, gamers decide they can get real world jobs, and the types of realism that are in games which end up involving you physically hurting yourself. So a whole series of bizarre oddities with media information that's out there. So the first one we want to jump into is this fun little fact that Superman Day is just around the corner, and within that there's a number of odd occurrences. So Superman Day, it's a weird little holiday. Well, not really a holiday. It's one of these unofficial, part fan, part commercial holiday experiences. There's a couple of them that float around during the year. Probably the one most people are familiar with is May the 4th, which is Star Wars Day, often involving a lot of Star Wars propaganda, fanish activity, as well as commercial announcements. There's a couple of other weird and wonderful days which have been both bottom up and top down. Bottom up, fan culture developing a day around it, and then top down commercial activity kind of linking into it. There's the Alien Day, which is linked to the planet from the Alien movie, LG-421. There's Tau Day, which is linked to Douglas Adams' Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy universe. But we're looking today at Superman Day. And of course, Superman Day occurs on April 18th. Initially, it was a day that was linked to the promotion for the Man of Steel movie way back in 2013. And that was June the 12th. They just arbitrarily decided, we'll create a fake fan holiday based on that launch. And that pretty much became a default Superman Day until 2025, when it was decided a much better idea would be to celebrate April 18, which is the day the first issue of Action Comics by Jerry Siegel and John Schuster first released in 1938, which is where Superman first appeared. So April 18 is the kind of anniversary date where the first issue, comic book issue, of Superman appeared. And there'll be a number of weird announcements on that day. You know, there's a couple of articles floating around. Geek Tyrant, for instance, has one headlined: new details for this weekend's Superman Day 2026 include animal adoptions, pop-ups, and a spotlight on Supergirl and Crypto. So this idea is that this Saturday, Superman Day isn't just going to be about capes and comics. Warner Brothers is trying to turn it into a cultural moment that includes saving real animals. So it's in the US. So Warner Brothers is going to celebrate Superman Day with some big activities, mainly US based. There'll be comics, so there might be some comics floating around at your local comic book store that are celebrating this. Some free issues, maybe. There'll be various limited edition stuff. Mainly, what it seems to be beginning to hype is Supergirl. Of course, with the movie around the corner, DC's wanting to spotlight Supergirl, so there's some variant covers for comic books coming out, special editions. There'll be some tie-ins, which is interesting. So in the US, Warner Brothers is partnering with Best Friends Animal Society to encourage pet adoptions, making heroism tangible beyond the screen. So that's a kind of cute way, I guess, of trying to transmediafy, right? Try to get the idea and spirit of Superman out beyond a comic book into the real world. So tying into this animal adoption, it's an interesting question. If you're more excited about these limited editions, I mean, that's what led to the comic book bubble burst, where there were all these variant covers, variant alternative issues. So we'll see if that's really going to get the excitement going. What excited me, though, thinking of Superman, was the fact that back in 1949, there was the Superman Australian radio serial. So, of course, radio serials dominated popular culture from the 40s through to the 50s, where people would listen in to their radio systems for the big audio radio dramas, Bonanza. We've featured a lot of them on Media Mothership over previous episodes. So definitely listen back into some of those great episodes of radio dramas like Rawhide and so forth. Superman was one of the big ones. Superman, interestingly, from the radio drama series, it innovated a lot of what we've come to know as classic Superman. So, for instance, Kryptonite first appeared in the radio drama series. It wasn't part of the comic book series. So, in terms of how radio was helping to establish and define Superman, in many ways more than the comic series, the radio drama series in the US during the 40s really helped define some of the key aspects of what Superman meant. So Kryptonite first appeared. It provided a way for the writers of the radio drama to try to get some vulnerability into this character. Prior to Kryptonite, of course, the difficulty was, where do you put Superman's limits at? If you've got this incredibly powerful character, how are you going to start defining their limits? Introducing the idea of Kryptonite, very clever. Ironic, his home world kills him in a way, Kryptonite. Asteroid shards from his home planet, Krypton. Up and Away was a radio edition. So the idea that rather than leaping over buildings and so forth, which was the default setting in the comic books, the idea that Superman would fly really became popularized through the radio drama, through their phrase up and away, which was part of the radio series, and then, of course, became popular in the TV series. And it really was one of these efforts in radio to give an audio signature for what people couldn't see. That is, Superman's flying, so you would have to say, up and away. Perry White, Daily Planet, as the core narrative hub for Superman, also first appears on radio. Perry White is named the editor of the Daily Planet on the radio series. The newsroom did exist in the comics, but the kind of naming of the editor, Perry White, and strengthening the role of the Daily Planet was all through the 1940s radio show, and really anchoring the idea of Clark Kent with journalistic ethics, civic responsibility, and that structural device of him being a reporter, really came through the radio series. Jimmy Olsen as well became a much more central character in the radio series. And finally, we get these sounds that Superman, the radio series, began to invent. That is, these transformation cues where you hear Clark going to Superman through the way the actor themselves performs the dialogue. That you have this, milksop performance for Clark, this kind of hesitant voice for Clark, and then you have the actor themselves tone shift to a much more assertive, powerful Superman voice. So we'll hear some examples in a second. What I want to do is play the Australian Superman from 1949. So if you check out the NFSA government websites, the National Film website there, the National Film and Sound Archive of Australia website, they've got a great write-up of the Superman Australian radio series, pointing out that, of course, it's from America. In this adventure series, we'll hear a little snippet of aimed at children. It was locally made, starring Brisbane native Leonard Teal as Superman and Margaret Christensen as Lois Lane. There are 2 episodes that are in the kind of public domain environment you can find on YouTube or by going to the National Film and Sound Archive from the Australian 1949 Superman series. The story, it's interesting. I mean, what we'll be hearing is Superman, as he was still being defined, he's not battling supervillains. There's no kind of mastermind or supervillain that Superman's being challenged by. It's often lowly crooks. It's the kind of capitalist corporate system that Superman's trying to challenge. So this episode that we're going to hear is, again, about some misrepresentation, low-level crime interest, but it was very much what defined Superman during those early 40s and into the 50s period. So listen here to the intro and setup of The Adventures of Superman from Australia. This first aired 1949. Think of how Australian this sounds. Can we hear the Australian voices coming through from the way this episode's introduced? We'll play it through as we hear Superman themselves identify themselves and hear whether or not you feel that this episode exists in this in-between American-Australian, or does it sound American? Let's listen to it now. This is 1949, Superman, the Australian radio series, episode 1, 1949.
And now, Superman. Mighty lone defender of justice, hiding his true identity as Clark Kent, reporter on the Daily Planet. Perry White, arriving in Stone Ridge in search of Kent and Lois, pays a surprise visit to Cass Stryker and receives shocking news.
Mayor White, I hardly know how to tell you this.
Tell me what? Come on, man, out with it.
Well, there's been a bad log jam in the river, and some of the logs swept up on the bank at the site of an old timber camp. One of the shacks was completely demolished.
Well, what about it?
Mayor White, Kent and Miss Lane were last seen in that shack.
Searching for a solution to the secret of Stone Ridge, Clark Kent and Lois Lane finally located Ralph Marlowe in a deserted logging camp where he had been kept prisoner by Matt Golden, Cass Stryker's right-hand man. Ralph surprisingly defended Stryker, claiming that he was being double-crossed by Golden. However, in finding Ralph, the 2 reporters walked into a trap. And now, bound with strong rope, they listen to the sounds of advancing destruction as hundreds of logs sweep down the river, bringing swift, crushing death.
Here they come. In a minute, they'll pile into the block Golden built and come shooting up the bank into this shack. Then it's the end for us.
Kent, who up to this minute had been searching for some way of saving Lois and Ralph without divulging his true identity of Superman, has finally come to a decision.
I can't wait another second. Keeping my secret means their lives, so it's time for Superman to take over.
But even as he snatches bonds and resumes his true identity of the Man of Steel, hundreds of massive logs smash into the wall.
All right, that's a wonderful, wonderful point to pause it there. And again, you could hear that delivery of him performing Superman as he goes from the kind of what would be referred to as the milksop Clark Kent to the assertive, dominant Superman. So again, the way he delivered that vocal performance right then, was it Australian? I mean, it's not as kind of dinkum die stereotyped as your kind of Brisbane drawl that you might imagine. So it's certainly trying to emulate that American performance of Superman, but it does have a bit of a warm Australian vibe to it. Worth checking out the other episodes. So that's the Superman Australian radio serial. If you've got some time on Saturday to celebrate Australia Day, Australian Superman Day, go check out the Superman Australian radio serial over at the National Film and Sound Archive. It's so interesting, forgotten history there. While we're still talking about superheroes, the commentary, the kind of critique of the Superman idea that we're seeing at the moment with the Amazon Prime series The Boys is currently in its final season. There's a fun interview with one of the key showrunners talking about how frustrated the showrunner is given, and he's given up trying to out-satire American politics as reality keeps beating him to the punch. So the headline here from Polygon is, The Boys is pro-religion, says creator, just not the kind wielded by power-hungry madmen who think they're Jesus. So this is a interview with Eric Kripke, showrunner of The Boys, and he's frustrated that real-world politics keeps outpacing his show's satire. And in season 5, the current season, Homelander, the kind of Superman parody, the Superman commentary, a kind of a super-powered individual, similar to Superman, but as if Superman became morally bankrupt, as we see in The Boys. The showrunners become frustrated that real-world politics keep getting better, as in this season, Homelander decides he's God, and within 48 hours, of course, in the real world, Trump has posted an AI image of himself as a Jesus-like figure, making the fictional plot from The Boys feel uncomfortably prescient. So again, this is a surprising article in terms of how confident Kripke, the showrunner, was that the God complex he'd written, of course, months ago for the current season of The Boys was just going to be too absurd, he says in the interview. He thought, this God complex that he's giving the character will be too absurd. There's no way this get one up by reality. But of course, he's frustrated by the fact that indeed he was wrong, and that 48 hours after that episode aired, or was it before that? Anyway, before that episode aired, Donald Trump, of course, confirmed his own God complex with his bizarre AI Jesus meme post. So truly weird when fiction loses the ability to, I guess, shock us, and realities just become too wild to parody. All right, moving on to equally strange little moments, going from Superman Day now and superheroic people to performing realism. When we say we want realism, but what we actually want is a convincing performance. There's two interesting articles I've come across. One from Rock Paper Shotgun, a PC gaming magazine site. Headlined, "I wanted you to feel bad. Former Battlefield audio designer recalls punching himself to record more realistic gunshot screams." So this article is proposing the question, what would you do for the perfect sound effect, I guess? This game designer, it turns out, has punched himself until he screamed for real based on the severity of the punches he delivered. And his colleagues said it was just too real. So the article's talking with former Battlefield audio designer Bence Pajor, how he reveals he once punched himself repeatedly, hard enough to scream, to record realistic bullet hit sounds. And this is for the game he was working on at that stage, which was Battlefield 3 or 4, he says. A colleague had such severe anxiety while playing the game and the audio that Bence was able to put into it that it resulted in these recordings being pulled from it. Pajot now works for Ark Raiders, the big popular open world PvP, PvE game, after doing 20 years of war game audio. It's interesting in terms of how he recorded that. So, of course, the surprising detail I found was he said he hid under a blanket in the studio Foley room. So a Foley room is where there's various things to create sounds that sound like sounds. So you want to deliver the sound of of rain. So there'll be a maraca with rice filled in it or something. So in the Foley room, he put a blanket over him, and colleague walked in, he says, and saw him under the blanket screaming and hitting himself. So it was quite bizarre. Let's listen to this interview briefly. It's a really fascinating discussion as he goes through the fact that he was a former Swedish military sniper that turned to audio directing. So he's saying that in the interview, he talks about how he brought this real combat experience to his sound work. But as he was doing this and looking for more verisimilitude, more kind of immersive sounds that sounded real, the recordings became so visceral that a fellow designer got panic attacks and said they could no longer play the game anymore because it was triggering their previous war experiences. Pajor himself says that leaving the war game audio space felt like a huge relief after 20 years of killing people in a realistic fashion for good audio design in video games. So let's listen here quickly. I mean, here's his discussion where he's talking about the type of efforts he was making to get immersive audio spaces in his work and the type of, I guess, lengths he was going to do it. So this is from the Game Maker's Notebook. It's The Sounds of Ark Raiders with audio director Bence Pajor. Let's listen to a little bit of that now.
Battlefield 3. And I was going to make all the sounds for getting hit by bullets. And I went into our, we had a little Foley room. And I put a blanket on myself to get rid of we had a window there, so it was a bit of an echo in the room. So I put a blanket over me and I started hitting myself really hard to the point where I screamed from real pain of hitting. Someone saw me as well, like, what's going on here? Like a guy under a blanket.
Having a nervous breakdown.
Like, yeah, what's going on? And I did that, and it was like a super visceral experience.
Yeah, no kidding.
And I wanted to catch it, so I had like a handy, like a little, one of those small just recorders, and I had it like under the blanket, and it made all those noises because it scratched my shirt, and I was like screaming and hitting myself, and then the recording was crazy, like distorting, and it was all mad. And I put it into the game. We were playing these sounds, and also you could get shot and you ended up like in a state where you were just lying down, but you were not dead. And then And then one of the designers came. I put that in the game, and I when I listened to it, it's like this feels crazy. This is awesome. This is super immersive. I was really happy with the recording, even though it was completely broken in a way. But then the designer who was designing all the guns and everything, he came to me and was like, I don't want to play the game. I can't play. You need to, this is not good. I get anxiety attacks.
Yeah, right.
I can't play the game. And in our game, you're going to get shot 1,000 times. I cannot listen to this. I get panic attacks.
Yeah.
And I just felt like, yeah, mission accomplished. That's what I wanted it to feel super immersive and visceral. And I wanted you to feel bad. But then that was just like, that was across the limit.
Well, yeah, I guess.
So that's an interview with the game designer for Battlefield series over 20 years, as well as now currently the designer for the series Arc Raiders, talking about their experience creating audio. That was Bence Pajor. The other really unusual bit of video game content creation I came across, and it's quite timely to discuss this, given this weekend we have the Level Up Tasmania video game showcase happening on 17th and 18th of April here in Hobart. Worth checking out, which is all going to be about playable games from Tasmanian game makers, chats with developers, some industry insights, and of course we've had Emerald King on a few weeks ago talking about the cosplay competition, which will be happening there. So go check that out. Friday 17th, Saturday 18th. They're both public showcase days down at the waterfront there in Hobart, Tasmania. So great chance to meet some video gamers. So as well as that wonderful audio discussion, another article from Kotaku talking about how video game developers were explaining how pausing works, and sometimes it gets weird. So game developers here revealed that pausing your game is way weirder than you'd think as a player. And some of them are literally slowing down time to the point where 1 second would take 3 years, so the game could be paused. So in this article from Kotaku, video game developers use surprisingly varied methods to pause games, from simply slowing time to near zero speeds. And again, that was mainly concerns that the engine would break. There were kind of coding concerns around the game. So the story had gotten around that the best way to avoid breaking your game is to not pause it entirely. You get a kind of super slow speed. So this was this was a quote from developer Tommy Hanusa talking about the Unreal Engine, where he set the timescale to 0.000001 so that they could play test it and see how serious things were going and avoid breaking some concerns of the UI. So it seems like what a bizarre feature of this effort to try and create pausing, which turns out to be much more difficult than you'd imagine. One developer in the article goes on to talk about their experience at Frontier, where the game had 7 different levels of pause they could use, and each would be triggered by different events, like a disconnected Kinect camera or the Xbox system menu popping up. And yeah, it seems that, it might be explained. I don't know if people out there have ever noticed a game doing something strange when you pause it, or a pause menu that seems glitchy. It turns out, as this article from Kotaku explains, there's probably a wild hack that's working behind the scenes to have assisted that. So looking at the next moment where games leak into reality. So I found some fascinating little insights here. into, over the last 2 or 3 weeks, moments where games have shifted into the real world around us. The Verge have a fascinating article about, it's headlined, "Now the FAA says gamers are the answer to its air traffic controller shortage." So this article's talking about how the FAA has suffered a number of recruitment issues, and they're launching a new recruitment campaign targeting gamers to fill a critical shortage of air traffic controllers in the US. So the agency's arguing that gaming skills like quick thinking, focus, and complexity management translate directly to what needs to be done with airline, air terminal management on the job. However, the FAA faces significant training challenges, including instructor shortages and high failure rates, the article goes on to say. I mean, it's a great salary, but again, the article talks about, despite the history of this, they've always struggled to get enough trainees. It's not new. I mean, I know previous administrations, the article points out, have tried to use gaming in the past to get people to join flight coordinators, but at airline terminals. But maybe if you're a good gamer, that is a pathway of professionalization to consider. Who knows? All right, here's an article from Polygon talking about how a major survival game, video game, has just admitted that forcing player versus player modes, PvP, on 80% of its players was a mistake, and it's completely redesigning the game to fix it. This is the Dune Awakening game, which released recently, and the developers saying that they're now shifting to PvE first to avoid the kind of backlash they've faced with some of their gamers. Let's listen to the trailer to
Rated M for mature.
This game. You can hear there the dramatic sounds of the guns, which shows that, yeah, it was mainly a PvE game, but it turns out that data they've done after discovering that only 20% of players were using these PvP features that they'd laid into the game. And of course, the experience was that PvP and having effective PvP is what's required for many multiplayer gaming environments. So it's been fascinating to see that their internal data is showing that only 20% of players are using these PvP features, which means that 80% of the gamers never engaged with what they thought the main point of the game was, which was PvP content. So the studio is going to disable many of these PvP zones and offering separate instances so players can choose their experience, maybe a bit like Arc Raiders, which allows you to decide, or at least tries to shift people into more PvP servers if they're going to play that way, or more PvE servers, player versus environment, if they're not looking for high combat with other gamers. It's interesting, yeah, because the higher resources do reward the PvP areas to incentivize those who want the challenge. But again, if you've got 80% of the players just saying, I don't want this at all, it does make you wonder the amount of effort they're doing for the smaller 20% is worth it. So this new patch will remove PvP for some areas. It'll try to counterbalance that by having some more incentives to, I guess, get people to do the PvP. But it's interesting. I mean, I know myself, I sometimes prefer PvE much more. You know, Helldivers, another kind of action-oriented Starship Troopers type video game. A little more engaging, I find, in a PvE player versus environment space than the high, sweaty PvP environments. Yeah, I mean, I wonder how many games people quit because they're forced into competitive modes that you don't really want to sign up to. So maybe it does reflect a larger shift in gaming where developers are moving away from a one-size-fits-all design, which has previously been more PvP type environments. But data from Dune Awakening shows that this alienates many players, so this might be the end of the mandatory PvP space to instead have a more accessible and inclusive gaming environment, which has a bit more PvE, like Dune Awakening might be going into. All right, moving to the question of who controls meaning. There's two articles, one from Doctor Who and one from Star Wars. So pretty much your two big franchises, both coming at this same question from different angles. Who controls the meaning of Star Wars or Doctor Who? Is it the actors? Do the actors fully control their characters, or is it more with the audience? Let's have a look at Polygon first, where Mark Hamill was interviewed recently saying that Luke Skywalker's sexuality is whatever viewers want it to be. Since George Lucas never defined it on the screen, there's flexibility there. Nearly 50 years after A New Hope, the actor Mark Hamill, who played Luke Skywalker, refuses in interviews or discussions with fans to lock down the character's sexual identity. Is he queer? Is he hetero? He refuses to answer. Whatever you feel Luke Skywalker is, that's him. And he's standing firm, even as Lucasfilm is quietly rejecting bringing back probably one of the biggest kind of fan relationships, or I guess extended universe relationships that Luke has. That's the character of Mara Jade, who was in the books or comics. He gets married to Marvel's Star Wars Union, 1999 to 2000. Yeah, featured the wedding of Luke Skywalker to Mara Jade. They have kids and everything. Anyway, so Lucasfilm has rejected bringing back Mara Jade, which would probably head us towards a storyline where where Luke Skywalker is not gay and is going to have a family and so forth. But instead, it flips it to it's still being an open question. So Mark Hamill says his stance is that if you want him to be gay, he is. If you want him to be, he's not. If you don't want him to be, he's not. It's whatever you want. Lucasfilm, of course, has officially rejected reintroducing Mara Jade, the character which Luke Skywalker marries and has kids with, into the canon. So it's now leaving Luke's romantic future deliberately undefined, which is fantastic. And the bigger question is, of course, it reflects a decade-long, or decades really, of culture war tensions over LGBTQI plus representations in mainstream franchises like Star Wars, and the frustration of wanting to see these identities in these films and franchises. So it's an interesting question around, I guess, that question, if a character's sexuality was never shown on screen and defined, does the fan's interpretation matter more than what a creator could come along and say? Or should it be the studios eventually picking a kind of canon that then provides the answer? We'll see. We'll see which direction this goes in for Star Wars. It'd be very interesting to see where that goes. However, taking a different tact, let's immerse ourselves in this universe. right, yes, so that's the unmistakable tune of Doctor Who. Of course, that's the Peter Capaldi opening. I'm sure most people got that from the Doctor Who opening theme there. Interview recently with Peter Capaldi, reported on Gizmodo. It's quite interesting, where Peter Capaldi talks about how playing the Doctor wasn't just a job, it was a personality transplant, Peter Capaldi says. Capaldi in the interview goes on to reveal how the role forced him to bury who he really was. So this is an interview with Peter Capaldi, of course, who played the 12th Doctor from 2014 to 2017. It revealed in the interview that he does have regrets not staying longer in the role of Doctor Who, but also admitting the role forced him to suppress his naturally miserable personality, he says. He felt constant pressure to be cheerful in public so fans wouldn't be disappointed. So it's interesting there to hear an actor talking about the role's intensity. Capaldi describes the pressure as quite intense because you're, quote, on all the time, end quote. And you don't want to let people down. So as he's walking through the streets, fans are coming up to him. He wants to be the Doctor. What would the Doctor do? He doesn't want to be miserable. So he's saying there he had to make some personal sacrifices as he was performing this role. He had to fundamentally change his personality, saying, I'm quite miserable, really. But I thought, you can't be miserable if you're Doctor Who. So he has mixed feelings on that. Despite that pressure, he admits it was great fun to play the Doctor. And it was kind of with bittersweet regret he stepped out of it. So quite fascinating that question of who controls the identity of a character. And Peter Capaldi say he was quite miserable and not at all often thinking he was Doctor Who. But of course, the Doctor isn't miserable. So cheer up. All right, another interesting article in Engadget about AI. A new study suggests that using AI might be making us smarter right now, so as immediately as you use it, but then dumber in the long run. And it only takes 10 minutes for your brain to become dependent. So we'll see what that means about possibly trying to survive the AI environment. This is an article, a new study that found that while AI tools improve immediate performance, so as soon as you've got a question, you're starting to use AI to help resolve it, it'll give you a kind of sense of problem solving, of getting an answer, of doing something quickly, so immediate performance boost, this research found. They said that it does, however, create cognitive dependency. So we were talking about that last week with the cognitive dependency. And they've measured it at about 10 minutes. You'll find yourself more and more prone to use it or defer to it. And over time, it will lead to worse results and burnout once the tools are removed. Researchers warn this could damage long-term learning and human innovation. It's an interesting study, worth looking into. So they found a dependency trap occurs. So half of the participants using AI for maths problems saw steep performance drops when access was cut off midway through, with many simply giving up. And so this test involved them, like they'd be able to use AI for the first half of the test, and then suddenly they'd have it removed from them. And what they found was after using AI and having easy access to answers, that some just simply gave up. It's just simply too much of an effort. I was talking to Katie, volunteer at Edge Radio in the office today, and they were recounting a similar story of how they'd heard anecdotally a research done where people would be going into a pharmacist with a health regime or cleaning regime or moisturizing regime that they'd got off of ChatGPT, and even where the pharmacist was saying, well, look, we don't have those brands, or I'm not quite sure what that brand is. It's probably not what's meant to be the one. And the pharmacist giving them advice of how to move forward. Katie will say that some people just gave up. Just, no, if it's not this, I give up and will not defer to your expertise-ness. And because it's not what the AI have said, I will move on. Which is kind of what this article is warning, that there'll be the concern of a dependency occurring and a giving up occurring. So it points out it's not just maths results held across multiple experiments. This was 350 and 670 participants were used in this research. And even reading comprehension was shown to deteriorate if you relied upon ChatGPT too heavily or AI, any LLM. As well. So there's some surprising details there that people didn't just get answers wrong after the AI was removed. It was that they stopped trying altogether. And I think that's the worrying thing this research is pointing out, that the persistence dropped, not just their accuracy. So it wasn't just that they got wrong answers after that, where they had to use their brain to solve the maths, but also that their persistence dropped, that they just stopped trying altogether. So a worrying bit of news there to end on. What's making me happy this week? Well, I guess to finish up the show, we're about at the end of the show now. I had the enjoyment of watching Project Hail Mary last week, so I've written a little analysis up on the Media Mothership website. You can get to that at mediamothership.com.au. And I found that was really fascinating film in terms of having a character for whom they began the film. Again, no spoilers yet, but Act 1, they have amnesia. So it's a fascinating film where, as the character begins to find out more about themselves during the film, and their amnesia dissipates and their memories come to the fore, the idea of are they a hero or not a hero becomes kind of interrogated. So it's a fun, heartwarming film, well worth watching. So again, I've written a little analysis up of that that's worth seeing. This weekend, of course, in Hobart, there's some exciting events happening. There's the Level Up event at the video game showcase in Hobart. There's also over in Youth-Arc, a market that's worth checking out. So do check those out. Of course, show notes for Media Mothership will be available on the podcast that you can grab from your podcast provider of choice. You can listen to previous episodes as well as this episode on demand by going to edgeradio.org.au or to Media Mothership's YouTube and Twitch. And next week, we'll be diving into some more exciting, interesting, unusual media stuff in the world. This has been Media Mothership for another week. Kick back, enjoy tunes.
You're listening to Edge Radio.
If you use public transport,